They used to line up for his money, always with smiles and sweet words. But when he said, "It's all gone," they disappeared faster than the cash ever could. What they didn't know, what he planned, was a simple lie meant to reveal the truth, and what he discovered shattered him. Harold Whitmore was the kind of man whose name opened doors, turned heads, and made investment firms fight for his attention. At 78, the billionaire real estate mogul had traded stocks, raised skyscrapers, and donated wings to hospitals that bore his name. But none of that mattered now, not as he sat in his sun-drenched estate, watching the ocean waves crash below, wondering who would still be by his side if the money disappeared. It had started small. A lingering sense that his children and grandchildren no longer visited him, but rather the fortune he represented. Birthdays turned into business. Meetings, holiday dinners became silent negotiations masked in turkey and champagne. And the smiles, oh, the smiles, they were never quite real. His daughter, Elaine, would stop by every Thursday, but it was always with paperwork in hand. "Daddy, just sign here," she'd chirp, her perfectly manicured fingers pointing to a trust fund transfer. His eldest son, Robert, would call only when a new investment needed just a little boost. And the youngest, Danny, well, Harold hadn't seen Danny in 6 months. Not since the incident in Las Vegas involving a Lamborghini, a nightclub, and hush money. The final straw came on Harold's birthday. His family threw him a lavish party at Lundy, his own expense, and spent more time posing for photos than talking to him. His 9-year-old granddaughter handed him a card that said, "Happy birthday, Grandpa," with glitter. But when he opened it, inside was a note from Elaine reminding him of her upcoming condo renovation gift. That night, Harold sat alone in his study. The laughter and music from the party echoed down the marble halls. He looked at the oil paintings of his ancestors, pioneers and survivors who built lives from scratch. And he made a decision: he would test them. The next morning, Harold called his longtime lawyer, Mr. Jennings, a stoic man with wire-rimmed glasses and a deep, gravelly voice. Jennings had served the Whitmore family for over 30 years. "I want you to draft a statement," Harold said slowly, his fingers tapping the desk. "Make it convincing. I want everyone to believe I've lost everything, through a bad investment, a lawsuit, anything. I don't care how. But I want them to believe it." Jennings raised an eyebrow. "Sir, are you certain? The fallout could be significant." "That's the point," Harold said, almost in a whisper. "I need to see who they are when there's nothing left to gain." Within 48 hours, the press release was ready. It was distributed to key media outlets, crafted to look like an internal leak. From the family office, headlines appeared by the afternoon: "Whitmore Empire collapses. Billionaire caught in shocking investment scam. From fortune to fallout. Harold Whitmore loses it all." And just like that, the phone stopped ringing. By day 3, Elaine canceled her Thursday visit. "I've got a thing," she texted vaguely. Robert sent an email suggesting they take a step back from financial discussions for now. Danny, radio silence. But not everyone disappeared. Maria, the housekeeper of nearly 25 years, still came in every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. She brought Harold his tea, dusted the library, and smiled like she always had. "Money comes and goes, Mr. Whitmore," she said gently, "but the soul doesn't change." 2 days later, his childhood friend Walter came by. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. "Saw the news," Walter said, sitting down uninvited. "Thought you could use a drinking buddy." They sat on the porch for hours, sipping scotch and watching the tide roll in. "Funny thing about life," Walter said. "When you're up, everyone wants to climb with you. When you're down, well, now you'll see who never cared about the latter." Harold nodded. His heart was heavy, not from loss, because in truth, he had lost nothing, but from revelation. The truth was far more brutal than any bankruptcy. By the end of the week, the estate was quiet. No calls, no visits, no concerned family members. Harold watched his granddaughter's glittery card on the desk. He thought of the pony Elaine once begged him to buy for her daughter, and how she never even rode it. He remembered how Robert insisted on flying first class because reputation matters, even for a 2-hour flight. And how Danny once suggested turning the guest house into a party loft. Harold had refused, and Danny hadn't spoken to him since. Now as the days passed, he realized none of them had ever truly seen him, just his money, his power, his utility. Came Monday. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. It was Elaine. She walked in without knocking, looking frazzled. "Daddy, we need to talk," she began, her voice clipped. "Hello to you too," Harold said calmly, sipping his tea. "I need to know if it's true, all of it. Did you really lose everything?" Harold nodded solemnly. "Yes, I trusted the wrong people." Elaine sat down hard on the leather armchair. This affects us, you know. I mean, the condo renovation, the accounts you promised for Lily's school. What am I supposed to do now?" He looked at her. "I thought you came to check on me," Elaine blinked. "Well, of course. I mean, obviously. But I need to plan." Harold said nothing. The next day, Robert showed up. Suit and all. "We need to talk strategy," he said briskly. "Damage control. We can recover the family name, maybe pivot into tech, rebrand." Harold cut him off. "There's no recovery, Robert. The money's gone." "Well, then we'll need to liquidate assets," Robert replied coldly. "I've been running projections. You want to sell my home?" Harold asked. "It's not about want, it's about need." Robert snapped out. By Thursday, Danny finally appeared, sunglasses on, phone in hand. "Yo, Gramps, heard the news. Wild, huh? Listen, I'm a bit tight this month. Think you can still spot me a few grand?" Harold stared at him. "Even now, that's what you come for?" Danny shrugged. "What else am I supposed to do?" "You're the fallback plan." Harold stood, walked to the window, and sighed. A week after the staged collapse, Harold sat with Jennings again. "I think I've seen enough," Harold murmured. "And?" Jennings asked. Harold smiled faintly. "It hurts. But I'd rather face the truth broke than live a lie in luxury." He had Jennings revise his will. The children were removed. Instead, a trust was established in Maria's name for staff, charities, and select individuals who had shown him loyalty and love without conditions. 2 weeks had passed since the news of Harold Whitmore's financial ruin broke. The once glamorous halls of the Whitmore estate, usually filled with clinking wine glasses and the murmur of shallow conversations, had grown silent. The scent of fresh lily had faded, replaced by the sterile quiet of abandonment. Harold stood before the mirror in his study. His eyes, though weathered by age, were sharp and alert. What he had seen, what he had learned, had cut deeper than he anticipated. His children, who once cried at his hospital bedside, now cried only for lost privilege. That afternoon, he met with Maria in the kitchen. She poured him a cup of warm tea, like she had done for over 2 decades. She didn't ask about money. She didn't ask if he was okay. She knew. "Your soul's tired, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. He smiled at her. "Not tired, just disappointed." Then she said something that would stay with him. "Disappointment comes from expecting fruit from a tree you never watered." The following day, Maria's nephew Jacob dropped by with groceries. A lanky, quiet boy in his mid-20s, Jacob had only met Harold twice, but both times he had been respectful, humble. "My aunt said you might need help," he said, placing a basket of apples, bread, and eggs on the counter. "We're not rich, but we care." That small gesture meant more to Harold than 1,000 checks from his children. Jacob didn't come for inheritance. He came with kindness. Meanwhile, the Whitmore siblings had begun to turn on one another. Elaine blamed Robert. Robert blamed Danny. Danny didn't care. He had already tried to pawn his Rolex and was talking to a shady friend about alternative income. On a stormy Thursday morning, Elaine returned, this time without makeup. Her eyes were tired. "Daddy," she said as she entered, voice shaking, "you have to understand. We weren't ready for this. We built our lives on what you promised." Harold stayed silent. "We're your family," she said, placing her hand over his. "Are you?" He asked gently, "Or were you just employees with blood ties?" Elaine's eyes welled up, but her silence was louder than tears. That weekend, Harold made a plan. He invited his entire family over for a Sunday brunch, just like the old days. Robert arrived in a pressed blazer, pretending everything was fine. Elaine wore a polite mask of concern. Danny was late, as usual, reeking of cologne and desperation. They sat around the polished mahogany dining table, the same one that had hosted generations of Whitmores. But today, no butlers, no chefs. Just Harold, a tray of croissants, and Maria quietly moving in the background. "Before we begin," Harold said, "I have something to share." The room tensed. "You've all heard about my financial situation. The losses, the collapse." Nods, awkward shuffling. "Well," he said slowly, "it wasn't true." They froze. Robert leaned forward. "Wait, what?" "I didn't lose a dime," Harold said calmly. "It was a test. A lie I told to see the truth." Elaine's mouth parted slightly. You lied?" "I had to," Harold said. "I needed to see who you were without the lure of my wealth." Danny stood up, fists clenched. "So this was some sick game? You humiliated us." Harold looked him dead in the eye. "No, Danny, you humiliated yourselves." Silence. "I wanted to believe you loved me. Not just the comfort I bought you. But when the money vanished, so did your affection. You stopped visiting. You stopped calling. Except when you needed something." Elaine wiped her eyes. "That's not fair. We were just overwhelmed." "No," Harold said sharply. "Maria still came. Walter came. A stranger Jacob brought me food. None of you brought anything but your resentment." Robert's face was pale. "So what now? Is this about the will?" Harold smiled faintly. "It's always about the will, isn't it?" He pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is my new estate plan. You're no longer beneficiaries." Elaine gasped. "Daddy, you'll each get a small monthly stipend, enough to live simply. But the rest, over $400 million, is going into trusts, charities, and into the hands of people who show love. Without a price tag." Danny flipped a chair. "You can't do this." "I can, and I have." In the weeks that followed, the family unraveled. Elaine tried to contest the will, but Harold had legal recordings of their conversations during the test. Robert distanced himself completely, his pride too wounded to recover. Danny spiraled Harold. Later heard he moved to Miami and was trying to launch a music label. Meanwhile, something beautiful happened. Harold's estate became a center of quiet charity. Maria oversaw community projects from the guest house. Jacob helped launch a free business mentorship program for underprivileged youth, with Harold guiding them weekly from his study. Harold laughed more, ate simpler meals, watched sunsets with peace instead of paranoia. For the first time in years, his heart felt ... And one Sunday morning, as he sat beneath a tree overlooking the sea, Maria brought him tea and asked, "Do you regret it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, because now I know who truly cares. And now I can die not a billionaire, but a man who knows the truth." Autumn arrived slowly at the Whitmore estate. The ocean breeze was cooler now. Leaves drifted across the winding driveway like golden confessions, and silence was no longer a symbol of abandonment, but of peace. Harold Whitmore had traded boardroom meetings for morning walks, and stock reports for handwritten thank you letters from young people whose lives had already been changed by his secret generosity. The press still stunned by the scandal and the sudden quiet from the family, began to speculate. Was Harold senile? Had he truly given up a fortune to people beneath him? But Harold didn't care. The newspapers could debate. His heart was finally full. He met weekly with Jacob, mentoring him on leadership and integrity. The boy asked good questions, honest ones. How do you lead people who don't trust you yet? He asked one evening. Harold smiled. You earn that trust slowly, day by day, and you never buy it with money, just honesty. Maria watched over the estate with calm dignity. She transformed the Whitmore guest house into a small community retreat where widows, orphans, and struggling artists found space to heal, dream, and work. For the first time, the Whitmore name meant something more than wealth. Harold's health, however, began to decline. He never told anyone, not even Maria, about the quiet pain in his chest, the heaviness in his limbs. He simply carried on with gentle resolve, knowing that his final chapter was being written not with fanfare, but with truth. One evening, while sitting on the back patio under a blood-orange sky, Harold opened a journal. It was one he'd written in since his test began. Page after page contained reflections, names, memories, and lessons. He wrote about his late wife, Margaret, who had once warned him, if you give them everything too easily, they'll never learn what anything is worth. He wrote about each of his children, painfully and honestly. About the moment he realized he had raised entitled heirs instead of grateful souls. He wrote about Maria, whom he called the true daughter I never had. About Jacob, the man I hope others will one day follow. He signed the last page with a shaky hand. To know the truth before you die is a rare and priceless thing. I am grateful. 3 weeks later, Harold passed quietly in his sleep. Maria found him early in the morning, seated in his reading chair, his eyes closed, as if mid-thought. The journal was in his lap, a faint smile still touching the corner of his mouth. News of his death spread quickly. But what came next surprised everyone. A public video was released recorded months earlier by Harold himself. He sat alone in the library wearing a dark suit, eyes calm and direct. If you're watching this, he began, then I've gone. But before I did, I wanted to leave one final truth, not for the world, but for my family. He paused. To my children, I leave no fortune. Because I gave you what money could never buy, and yet you never noticed. My time, my belief in you, my trust. You squandered it the moment you believed I had nothing left to give. To Maria, you have been my truest companion. I owe you more than a paycheck. I owe you my peace. And to Jacob, carry the torch. Light up corners the world forgets. And to those watching, remember this. Wealth is not what you own. It's what remains when everything else is gone. The fallout was swift. Elaine attempted to challenge the estate again, but Harold's will, airtight and complete, left no room. And worse, the video went viral. The internet, moved by his wisdom, turned his words into hashtags, memes, even college essays. Schools invited speakers to discuss the Whitmore test. Young people used his journal excerpts as inspiration for life projects. A year later, a foundation bearing his name launched scholarships for students from underserved communities. Managed by Maria and Jacob, the guest house expanded into a full retreat center with a waiting list of hundreds. But the Whitmore mansion? It was left untouched, preserved as a museum and sanctuary. Tourists would stand before the old man's favorite chair, whispering about the billionaire who tested his family with lies, only to leave behind a greater truth. Elaine, Robert, and Danny all faded from the public eye. Rumors swirled. Elaine downsized to a modest condo. Robert moved overseas, and Danny, they said, was working at a car dealership. But none ever spoke publicly about their father again. They didn't need to. The world had already seen what mattered, and so the man who once stood at the peak of wealth died with something greater, clarity. He had discovered the hearts of those around him, not by giving, but by pretending he had nothing left to give. It was never about money. It was always about love and who stayed when it vanished.